Hi, my name's Carl Monaghan and I'm a photographer and I live in Western Australia in Geraldton. Welcome to my retouching tutorial in Lightroom 4. Today I'm going to take you through my workflow from capture to finished image. I was out last night with my family and spent the evening at the local fun fair on its annual visit to our little country town in the midwest of Western Australia. And today I'm going to take you through the steps that I use to go from this raw capture to this edited capture of the fair scene. Now, just before we start actually looking at the way in which I did my editing, let's just have a look at my capture as an image. If you look up here on the top right hand side, you'll see that my histogram tells the story of the light that was captured. I captured this image at ISO 100 using my 24-70 Canon lens. I'm a Canon user. And I shot this image at 32mm f14 at 1/4 of a second. Now, of course, I did use a tripod. You could take this image handheld, although you would most likely need to raise your ISO and introduce an awful lot of grain into your image to get a speed for capture that allowed you to not have too much camera shake in the image. I highly recommend that you buy a tripod to do these sorts of images in late evening where your exposures are going to be quite slow. So right away, let's get on with the image. You can see that I've made quite a number of alterations along the way, and let's go straight to the raw file and get on with some basic editing in Lightroom 4. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is go from my library area where I have my images in a tutorial images. So I've just collected two of the images I took last night, one raw and one edited. And just looking at the raw file there, you can see that it's pretty flat. It's nicely exposed, but I think that the first thing we need to do is a little bit of cropping. So we'll go straight over to our develop module here and hit our crop button. And I'm just going to bring this image in just a little bit either side here. I've also got a little bit of unwanted foreground. I particularly want the cloud, so I'm just going to bring that in just a little bit, hit enter, and there we have an image that's a little bit more concise and constrained and allows us to do some work on it. It's a little bit flat and the light temperature of this image is a little bit on the cool side. I'd like to see it a little bit warmer. So right away I'm going to go to my temperature here and I'm just going to up the temperature just a little bit to warm this photo up. It was late afternoon, so the light was just a little bit warmer than what my camera's captured, and that's not unusual. So I've just raised that up to 7500 or thereabouts for temperature. Having done that, I'm just going to do some basic adjustments that I like to do with images where I have a little bit of underexposure in the foreground or in the shadows. And I'm just going to go to my shadow details here and I'm just going to increase my foreground shadow details up to around about 72, which just brings out the details here in my shadow areas. If I slide it all the way back, you can see that that's reducing shadow detail and that's increasing shadow detail. So let's just bring that up to around about 71 there. And at the same time, I want to bring down the highlights in my sky So I'm just going to drop them down. That just gives me a little bit stronger dynamic in my sky, which I particularly like. I'm also going to set my white point by clicking Control and just bringing in the pixels so as I can see them, and that gives me my white point. And I'm going to click Option and again bring in my black points there, so just when I start to see pixels I know that that's my black point there. So having fixed my black points and shadows, I'm now ready to move on. And just with those few adjustments, we can see that we're getting some way towards the final image here, which I've just brought up again, and just going back, we're starting to get somewhere. So let's just move on with a few more adjustments here. I think we need a little bit of clarity, which will strengthen up our mid-tones, and so just slide in my clarity slider along there. It's just going to bring in a little bit of mid-tone clarity, which I'm going to do there. I'm going to introduce a little bit of vibrance into my image, and just a little bit of saturation, not too much, but just enough to give it a little bit of punch, just there like that. And that's wonderful. That's looking pretty good. Of course, working straight from the raw file, it's probably not going to be exactly the same as my finished item. Every time one edits an image, we tend to edit it slightly differently, but the end results are going to be fairly close. So just bear with us as we move on with this edit. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to my vignette area, and I'm just going to introduce a little bit of vignette around the edges, post-crop vignette, which is just going to darken down the sky and the edges a little bit, drawing my attention to the center. And although that's made the image a little bit dark overall, we're going to do some localized adjustments using the brush tool, which will bring out some of those shadow details once again. So going up to my brush tool up here, I think that I want to bring out a little bit of lightness in the foreground, so I'm just going to increase the exposure here, choose a reasonable size brush, and just brush in a little bit of light in the foreground here as a good starting point to bring in that foreground back into play from our vignette, and that's looking quite nice there. The good thing about the brush is if you go a little bit too far, you can always bring it back a bit. It is a localized brush, so it's not affecting the sky in any way, and I quite like it just somewhere around about there. Now we can introduce a little bit more contrast in there if we want, and just a little bit more clarity. There we are, just there, just like that, and that brings us up quite nicely. And we'll just close off our brush there, and that allows us to have an overview of the image with the adjustments that we've made. And just zooming in there, I can see that my picture's very sharp and starting to take a nice form. One of the things I really like about Lightroom is the ability to use localized adjustments, and of course the fact that we're working on a raw file means if we make a mistake we can always go back. Okay, so moving along, let's just look at what else I'd like to do with my sky. I think that I'd like to bring in a graduated filter from the sky just to darken it down slightly. I'm not going to put too much of a darkness on there, but I do want it to be a little bit darker at the top, so I'm just going to drag my graduated filter down there just to darken the top of the sky, and I might fix up these brighter areas around here as well with a localized brush. So I'm just going to go to my brush tool, again I'm going to set it around 23, reasonable size brush, and I'm just going to darken down a few areas around this area. You don't want it to look too obvious, but you certainly want it within the character of the photograph, and that seems to be quite nice. You can do these as very small little adjustments. Now with this brush here, we can create a new brush for every change that we want to make by clicking new, and if we press the option key, you'll see that our effect goes to reset, and by clicking reset it will reset all of the localized adjustments to start again. I'm just going to introduce a little bit extra shadow underneath the tree here, and just like that. And again, if that's too much, we just pull it back just a little bit on here, but I did feel that that just needed to be a nice little feature there. And of course we can add just a little bit of darkness in a few other places as well, around the bottom of this image. Not too much, but enough just to bring that in just slightly, and clicking on the brush will close down that action, and we can then move on to the next area of editing. Now we're starting to get somewhere now, and it's starting to look like my finished piece from before. What I think I'll do now is just increase the contrast slightly, give it a little bit more punch overall, and possibly just increase the exposure slightly, not an awful lot. Oh, that's way too far, and we'll just bring that back to about +15. And really at the end of the day, you can adjust these images with a whole range of strengthening areas. We can create a brush and pop down to our HSL slider, which is our hue, saturation and luminance slider, and we can now affect the hue and saturation of certain areas of the image. We can add a little bit more orange or take away as we see fit. We don't want to go over the top here, but maybe just a couple of little bits just to make this really sing and pop and give it some really bright colour that you would really like to see at the fun fair and that we all enjoy. I don't have a tendency to change the hue of my images a great deal. I certainly would like to see a little bit more blue there. So I'm just going to bring in a little bit of, whoops, we're in the purples here. I'll just take that back, just a little bit of blue, and that's pretty good there. And whilst we're on the same brush, I think that we'll just add a little bit of red saturation here, not an awful lot, maybe just 4 points, a little bit of orange, and maybe just a little bit of yellow, and that's pretty good there indeed. Now the other thing that I notice here that my greens are pretty green, so what I'm going to do is just create a new brush, and I'm just going to reduce my saturation slightly in the foreground here. And I didn't really want to adjust my exposure, just the saturation, and we can see that we can bring that saturation way down if we want to. I just felt that it was probably just a little bit strong in saturation. That was probably a bit over the top there, so just bringing it back just that little bit there, making it much more neutral and original. And pretty much there you have it. We could play for quite a while longer, but let's just have a look at the before and after. That was the file that we showed you at the beginning, and this is my second edit, which is probably just a little bit cooler than this one. Nonetheless, if we wanted to warm this one up just a little bit, we can, Do a little bit of global warming here, just to give it that little bit warmer effect, which will bring it up just a little bit closer to this image here. And there we have it. We're pretty close, and I'm pretty happy with that. And there we have it. There's a tutorial on my workflow for the Lightroom retouching of the funfair scene taken last night. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Stay tuned. There'll be more tutorials to follow. Thank you.